Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuhu. Ramadan Mubarak. I have the great honor today and privilege to speak to you all on behalf of the American Muslim Bar Association as its founding president. AMBA is a national bar association which welcomes Muslims and non-Muslims who are inspired by the Ahlul Bayt, the traditions of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his family. We are a body of barred attorneys and law students who are working to create a collective voice for Muslim lawyers in America. We have a $0 budget and work wonderfully on the countless hours of our volunteers who donate their time because they are dedicated to the mission of truly reforming rather than assimilating into the U.S. justice system. Please consider learning more about AMBA's work by visiting our website at www.ambalegal.org and donating to our mission this Ramadan. For today's event, I'd like to discuss a little bit about Muslims and the significance of Muslims in the U.S. prison system over the last 50 years. Some have recognized that the presence of Muslims in the prison system have been due to the result of Muslims being at the forefront of fighting for prisoners' rights as well as filing lawsuits. For some, Islam's individually and socially transformative power provides an invaluable source of healing and protection for incarcerated people. Nevertheless, Muslims have been a target for the prison system since its earliest origins, since the practices of slave raiding on the African continent. Rather than shaming or shunning prisoners, Islamic tradition honors and redeems those who face incarceration, as exemplified in the stories from the Quran and the Islamic history that reveal the humanity of men and women who face imprisonment at the hands of brutal oppressors. It commands the virtuous to support incarcerated people, categorizing them alongside the orphan, the ill, the impoverished, and to do so with no sense of self-righteousness and ulterior motive, less than the purest love for God. See Quran chapter 7, ayah 8 to 9. The prophets, the saints, and the greatest imams from both the Shia and Sunni traditions have historically faced the injustice of their leaders and imprisonment in their lives. People often mistakenly romanticize the incision of social inclusion induced by imprisonment or solitary confinement by the likening to them to practices of spiritual reclusion practiced by the Prophet in the cave of Hira or itikaf, solitude spent in masjids. Although prison and solitary confinement certainly may induce spiritual transformations, the lack of choice in their experience constitutes them foremost as brutal practices of violence and oppression. In the same way, fasting during Ramadan does not and cannot by itself simulate the experiences of poverty and food insecurity, as is so often explained by Muslims today. The purpose of today's presentation is to raise awareness of Muslim sisters in prison, particularly during the month of Ramadan. The stories of Muslim women in solitary who were fasting during Ramadan, as well as the lack of religious accommodations for Muslim sisters. These are stories that need to be heard by the broader Muslim community. To that end, I'm proud to moderate today's session, graciously sponsored by the Islamic Center of New York University, entitled Ramadan in U.S. Prisons, Sisters in Solitary and the Call for Intersectional Human Rights. I'm blessed to learn today from sisters Aisha Clarke, Trisha Pethick, Evie Litwalk, and sister Karima Hanifa. Aisha Clarke is a formerly incarcerated Muslim sister and a convert to Islam. She is the Student and Reentry Coach for Tayba Foundation, an organization dedicated to serving individuals and families impacted by incarceration, believing in the power of human change through holistic guidance, education, and support. Evie Litwalk is also a formerly incarcerated Jewish sister and serves as the executive director of Witness to Mass Incarceration, an NYC-based nonprofit designed to change the narrative about incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people from invisibility and victimization to empowerment through documentation, leadership training, organizing, and advocacy. Chaplain Trisha Pethick was previously served as a New York State prison chaplain and is the founding director of the Muslim Prisoner Project, a nonprofit that provides books to prisoners and Eid gifts to their children. She is a graduate of Hartford Seminary's Islamic chaplaincy program. Sister Karima Hanifa of Iman Chicago represents an organization that models an integrative approach that employs holistic interventions to address the spectrum of structural and systemic injustices, incorporating primary behavioral and oral health, artistic expression, leadership development, organizing and advocacy, housing, job training, in an effort to sustainably increase the quality of life for people in marginalized communities. Since Sister Karima Hanifa cannot join us in person today during this virtual event, she has shared with us a few words that I'd like to share on my screen.
I just want to tell you a little bit about myself, and as you follow my story, you'll understand how my life fits into the model in which Iman finds most sacred. So, just to backtrack a little bit in my life, in 1993, I was 15 years old, and I found myself sentenced to consecutive life sentences. While I was incarcerated, the struggle was definitely real. I come from an Islamic background, and so while certain morals and values were instilled in me as a Muslima, of course, life had led me to deviate from what I knew to be right. While I was incarcerated, I took the initiative to begin to work on myself and to tie back into my moral compass, which placed me back into leadership position inside of the institution. So for the next 26 years of my life, I would be leading in Juma prayer, in Talim services, just really being a strong pillar inside of the Georgia Department of Corrections facilities, and I was in everyone in the state of Georgia as I was serving the 2 consecutive life sentences. There was a point when I believed that I would never get out, and then there was a point when my hope was renewed, and I realized that I needed to begin to prepare for my life upon being released. And so fasting was a very strong component in my life. Probably maybe 21 years into my sentence, or maybe 19 years, because it was actually for 8 years. I fasted every other day, right? I made a commitment to Allah because I needed to hold strongly to the rope of a line. So that was my way of holding on and maintaining my identity as a Muslima, and being able to keep a very close connection with the Creator, and to keep my life aligned with the Sunnah of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. All right, so now let's fast forward. After serving 26 years, I'm released from prison, and I learned about Iman, an organization whose holistic model is founded on serving the communities that we live in. It also has a very strong value that says that, those that should serve are those who are directly impacted. So as a directly impacted individual, directly impacted by the criminal justice system, I came home, and close to 2 years after being released, was offered a position as the community organizer, which is what I do now. Now, what does Iman do? So we offer services, reentry services. We mobilize in the communities. We do criminal justice reform. We do health and social services as well in the communities in which we live in. I don't want to be too long-winded, but I want you to know Islamic Center of NYU. I really wish that I could be there on today joining you, and it is truly a blessing to have received such an invitation. Ramadan Mubarak. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah, Sister Karima. Thank you so much for sharing those words. It was so great to hear from her. Iman, the organization she works for, the Inner City Muslim Action Network, which was originally started in Chicago. She works for Iman Atlanta, is really on the forefront of helping Muslim prisoners currently incarcerated and formerly incarcerated. So I'm so happy that they could have a voice and participate in the session. And later today, as we'll be sharing, I'm sure many of us will be pointing towards some of Iman's work, and I'll put their website in the chat box, so all of you can feel free to learn more about Iman. Now I'd like to turn it over to some of our sisters that are here with us today virtually, and I'd like to start with Sister Aisha Clarke. Sister Aisha, if you would, could you please tell us about your time in prison, your journey to Islam, how you became involved in Tayba Foundation? We'd love to just hear your story. Thank you so much.
Assalamu alaikum. Ramadan Mubarak. My name is Aisha Clarke. I work with the Tayba Foundation based out of California. I personally am in Pennsylvania. Let me back up. How my journey began was I had struggled with addiction since I was very young, a lot of trauma and things of that nature. And I was in and out of incarceration for years. In 2013, I had went to the state facility here in Pennsylvania of Cambridge Springs. And I had met a sister who wanted to study with me. And I come from a Christian background, a very military family on my mother's side. My father's side is full of a lot of addiction, and they're Christian as well. So I am the only Muslim in my family. Inshallah, that changes in time. So whenever I had met with this sister, we went back and forth, and she had her Quran out and I had the Bible out, and we would just study with one another. And alhamdulillah, over time, I just started to see all the proof and all the missing pieces that I never quite understood as a Christian, or things couldn't be answered for me that I had found in Islam. So during my time of incarceration, like I said, I was in and out for so long. So when I was a Christian, my time was definitely very, very different compared to when I was a Muslim. Whenever I was a Muslim, there was a lot of, the guards were a lot different. The inmates, not so, I wouldn't say they were different. At first, the community had a hard time because I was one of the only white Muslims when I first went into the facility at Muncie here in Pennsylvania. So I was one of the only white Muslims there. So they had a hard time accepting me at first. They thought I was just trying to, I did it for a man, or I was just trying to fit in somewhere, which that was never the situation in my life ever. And alhamdulillah, I was just blessed to be accepted over time, and things got better over the years. So the guards were very, very, I don't know the word I'm looking for. I would say arrogant to the fact of the way that they treated people, downright just disregarded feelings of just humans in nature, no matter what your religion is. They just would definitely put people down. So Ramadan was definitely the years that I was there, the first year it was okay. There was sometimes like we had issues as far as like sisters getting their suhoor bags. We would get them at night, and then in the morning, obviously we would break fast. They stopped letting us break fast together. They didn't want us to pray together. They said that as if we was praying together, we was a cult. So we had to pray alone in ourselves. At iftar at night, they did take us all up to the chow hall where like you have all your meals and stuff provided for you. There was a lot of the times where we would try to get together and offer prayer, and the sister who came in to pray with us, she had set like not boundaries, but she told them like our preferences on like, please don't walk in front of us when we pray. So they made it an initiative to do exactly what she asked them not to do. But we continued with patience. A lot of the sisters, there were some sisters who couldn't handle the backlash coming back from the staff. So they ended up in segregation just for speaking their mind, not any like action, or wasn't physical or anything of that nature, just from being verbal. So then my second to last year, because I was there in 2013 and I came home in 2018, and we had a statewide lockdown here due to mail situation, like incoming mail. They was finding contraband and whatnot on the mail. So they locked the whole facility down. All across the state, everywhere was locked down. So during that time, whenever it came to trying to get your bags in the morning to break fast or to begin fast with, and then the iftar, it was nearly impossible. So we were actually trying to support one another in that, but you're not allowed to share. You can get in trouble for sharing. And astaghfirullah, we did it anyways, just the nature of Ramadan. That's just what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to help one another. So I would say I went in 2013. I found out about Tayba Foundation. I came across a brochure in 2014 that they are an academic school as far as teaching Islamic material. So being that at the time I still wasn't really too much involved in the community because they kind of shied away from me, I had joined Tayba and I started my coursework with Tayba. And alhamdulillah, their work that they offer is amazing. It was, at times it was challenging, but it was good to have that challenging motive as far as like on a religious standpoint, rather than focusing on things that I had always focused on in the past. So I had came home to a town in Pennsylvania that I was the only Muslim in. So I had dealt with a lot of like, I was being called Antichrist and screamed at. And at the time I was not married. So I had like going out was almost challenging. I mean, even small children like riding on their bicycles and stuff would say provocative things or whatnot to me. So I had kept in contact with Tayba. And I kept doing like, they had like an online course when you come home, and I kept in contact with them that way. And it really was comforting to have somebody to reach out to that understood the same things that I was going through, that's been through a lot of the same things, and we had the same preferences. So they had asked me last year to help grade the assessments that I had once taken myself. So of course, I definitely wanted to give back to something that I benefited from, and I started grading. And then we just started a life skills and reentry program for Muslim women coming home. It's like a reentry program, and we are the first ones that we know of in the United States to have a Muslim woman working with Muslim reentry coming home. Now, the reentry program does not have to, you do not have to be Muslim to join into the reentry or the life skills, but majority of them right now are. So I would just say honestly that the way that it is when you're incarcerated, if your faith is not like very strong, if you can't build it there, then you really don't really have the capacity to stand firm on your own, let alone whenever, oh, mashallah, let alone whenever you come home, if you don't have that support coming from either family or friends or other sisters that you can be involved in. And alhamdulillah, I've met a husband. I had my first child on the way, and now I'm working with Tayba and helping sisters go through the same thing that I myself personally have been through. I'm trying to get into the trauma crisis case management, because we're finding now that majority of women who are incarcerated have some form of trauma, be it from the time they were young or older. And even being incarcerated alone is a form of trauma that takes on a person mentally that you don't realize that it does, but it most definitely does. It's a very different kind of environment that inshallah nobody has to go through, but we know that people do go through it, and those that go through it, I don't think that they deserve to have their backs turned on them, because like myself, I never imagined that I would be in the position that I'm in. I'm so grateful to be able to be here speaking on behalf of Tayba and helping sisters and the Ummah just in general. So Jazakallahu khair, and I appreciate it.
Jazakallah, Sister Aisha, subhanAllah, thank you so much for sharing with us so many different elements of your story, your journey to Islam, the amazing reentry work that you're doing now, and particularly highlighting things that need to be called to our attention, issues related to freedom of assembly and freedom of expression in U.S. prisons when it comes to speaking our faith and congregating as Muslims within prison. Thank you so much. Your value is truly appreciated here on this panel. God bless you. And I'd like to now turn it to another formerly incarcerated sister on our panel, Sister Evie Litwalk. Evie, I'd love for you to share with us your journey of incarceration and to the organization you founded, Witness to Mass Incarceration. In Islam, actually, we have what's called the Shahada, which means a witnessing. We bear witness to the oneness of God and God's supreme power. And this word to witness, to be witnessed by God and to witness God, this act of shahada, this act of witnessing is something so precious and so beautiful. So I love it that you've named your organization Witness to Mass Incarceration, because you truly are a witness, and we all living in the United States are a witness to mass incarceration, and we have to, like you always say, just shut it down. So we'd love to hear your story. Thanks for joining us.
So thank you, Salmah. I want to thank you and the Islamic Center for inviting me to speak today. It's an honor to be here. I am a formerly incarcerated Jewish lesbian and the child of 2 survivors of the Holocaust. These intersections mattered a great deal while I was incarcerated. I was in 2 federal women's prisons and spent time in solitary confinement and was released roughly 5 years ago. In 2009 and 10, I was living with my mother. I was her 24-hour caretaker. She had great difficulty hearing and seeing and walking. And I was putting away things because I was leaving for prison the next day when my mother, who was all of 4'9", walked in with her walker and looked at me and said, "I have something to tell you." And I stood up and she said, "It's going to be harder for you to be in prison than it was for me to be in concentration camp." And I looked at her, I said, "Mom, are you crazy? You were in Auschwitz. How could you compare the two?" And she said, "I was 12 years old, you're 60. And it would be years later in solitary confinement when my mother's words would come back to me. She said, "I was young, I was a child, I didn't know what was going on. You're an old woman." I didn't feel quite like an old woman, but you're an old woman and aware of what you lost, and you will see your life every day. And she was right. The moment I entered prison, I knew I was no longer in the free world. I arrived and an officer took me into a cold and dingy room, ordered me to strip naked, to pee in front of her, then asked me to lift my breasts so she could check for contraband underneath, and then asked me to bend over and cough so she could check that I had no paraphernalia in either my anus or my vagina. And at that moment, in that 10 seconds, when I was bent over and being strip searched for the first time in my life, I was more humiliated than at any other point in my life. And I knew in that 10 seconds that I had to shut down. I couldn't laugh, I couldn't cry, I couldn't scream, and that I would have to show absolutely no emotion. So I had to develop a set of coping skills that I didn't have, but I knew that, and that all took place in that 10 seconds. I was assigned to an orientation unit, and some of the veterans walked over to me and said, "If you want to do easy time, you got to stay under the radar and make sure no officer knows your name and the warden doesn't know your name." Well, I was a baby of the women's, gay rights, and civil rights movement. I was an old, experienced activist. I didn't and couldn't check my activism at the door. And as it turned out, it took less than an hour for me to be on everybody's radar. And how it happened is that people walk over to the so-called newbies, and you're allowed to bring in 25 pictures. So the first person comes over to me and says, "Are you married? Do you have a kid?" "No, I'm not married. No, I don't have a kid." Second person, "Are you married? Do you have a kid?" "No, I'm not married. I don't have a kid." After the fourth woman came over and asked the same questions, I said to myself, I've been out for 40 years. I'm not going back into the closet because I'm in prison. And by the way, when I did come out, the first person I came out to was my mother, who said to me, "If Hitler didn't kill me, you will." which at the time I thought was very funny. So the next person that came over to me and said, "Are you married? Do you have a kid?" I said, "No, and I'm a lesbian." And she said, "Can I see 20 your pictures?" So I had 25 pictures. Hang on one second. I had 25 pictures of my dog, Allie, and this woman screamed, "This white old lesbian has 25 pictures of her dog." And that was the end of me being under the radar for the entire time I was in prison. And I might say this lightly, but it was extremely dangerous for me to have come out in that way. I was I was punished for the entire time I was in prison. I was put, instead of being given a bed where there was in a normal position, I was put on what was called the bus stop, which was 10 bunk beds that were in front of the sleeping unit. So when the lights went off at 11 o'clock, the fluorescent lights, which go from wall to wall in a prison, went off behind us. But we were right under the fluorescent lights. Right in front of us was an ice maker, which came crushing down every 20 minutes. And on either side of where our bunks were, was the bathrooms and showers, which were used all night. So the purpose of the bus stop was to make sure that whoever they wanted to punish didn't sleep. And that's exactly what happened. All women work, at least in federal prison, all women work. And most of the time, if you're a 60-year-old person, they give you they let you work indoors so that you can mop a floor and then spend the rest of the day reading. Well, they put me, this was in West Virginia, and during the summer, the temperature in the mountains is 90 to 100 degrees. And they put me on landscaping, and they gave me a broom and asked me to sweep rocks off the street. And they did this knowing that I had a heart condition, and that on both sides of my family, everybody had died from heart attack or stroke. And as I was sweeping the streets, as I was sweeping the streets, a story came into mind, which my parents my mother had told me when she was young, which was this: in 1939, when the Nazis came into Poland, specifically Lodz, where my mother grew up, they took the men, the religious men and the businessmen, out for 3 weeks. So the last time she had seen her father, he had jet black hair, he was tall, and when he came back 3 weeks later, he had been beaten mercilessly, as did the other men. And when they brought them back off the truck, they asked the women and children to be there. And to humiliate them further, they forced them to sweep the streets in front of their wives and kids. As I was sweeping the streets every day, I could feel my grandfather, who I never met, sweeping alongside me. Now, prior to my incarceration, I was 60 when I went into prison. I did not attend religious services. I was traditional, but I didn't attend or observe on a regular basis for 45 years, since my brother's bar mitzvah. But day one of being in prison, I wanted a prayer book, a siddur, and I found one. And I found myself day one repeating the Shema, which is a Jewish prayer, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, saying it not once or twice, but hundreds and hundreds of times daily, quietly to myself. I ended up attending religious services, and I can tell you that it probably saved my life, having grown up with such strong faith in you need to go through an experience like this. Faith brings you through. So the one area in prison that we have any choice is religion. You can be Jewish one week, you can be Muslim the next week. They cannot prevent you from changing. So you don't have very many fun stories about prison, but this is a story I love to tell, which is 6 weeks prior to the Jewish holiday of Passover, we are able to order special kosher for Passover food. But 6 weeks, and so that includes things like chocolate covered matzah, chocolate covered everything. So you get this sheet and you have like 20 women around you saying, I want in on that. You know, I want some of that chocolate covered stuff. But 6 weeks before the sheet comes out, everybody converts to Judaism. 35 women converted to Judaism. And because they wanted the food. And also because for two nights, 5 hours a night, we got to have a service without guards. And for that, we were very grateful. As soon as the service ended, Ramadan was coming up. So the same 35 women converted to Muslim. So we got a kick out of being able to do that. That was the only good news. The bad news was in both prisons, medical care was virtually non-existent. And the physician's assistant who saw 1,300 women, whether you had a cyst or cancer or a migraine, this person basically said, you're fat, walk on the track and drink water. And when a woman came in who was very seriously ill and he gave her the fat speech and she died 2 weeks later when her gallbladder burst, I wrote an article which I posted, which I sent email, and an hour after it was posted, I was shackled and put into solitary and told they would keep me there for as long as they liked. And for you to understand, solitary is a prison within a prison, which is, and they can do whatever they want. And to really understand solitary, I want you to imagine you having to stay in your bathroom, assuming it's not a college dorm, in your bathroom where there's one toilet with the door closed. And where your shower or bath is a metal bed. There's no medicine cabinet. There's no computer. There's no phone. There's no crossword puzzle. There's no knitting. There's no nothing for you to do. The question is, how long do you think you could sit in your bathroom without wanting to break out of there? Because when you're in solitary and they close that door, there's no getting out. So when I tell people, try to sit in your bathroom with a locked door and nothing to do and see if you could do it. And what I will tell you is I was in solitary for 7 weeks and I have never recovered physically, mentally, or emotionally from having been in solitary. I was released shortly after solitary. I'm one of the 700,000 people being released each year. I walked out of prison with $30 in a bus ticket, arrived at Port Authority in New York to no one. My mother was not well enough to see me, and I didn't have any other people who wanted to meet me. I was homeless and penniless for 16 months until one friend who I happened to run into said to me, I will not stabilize unless I have housing. And I was able to get Medicare, my Social Security, and she found me the apartment I'm currently in. And I said, if I take this apartment, then my Social Security will go to rent. And I had been living in shelters where you pay $200 or $400. My Social Security will go to rent and I will never be able to eat. And she said, you'll find a job. I'll find you a job. I said, no, Irv, I'm old and I'm a convicted felon. It's not going to happen. Well, she realized I couldn't get a job and came to me and said, I'm going to give you $1,000 a month for 1 year. And that's going to enable you to pay your bills and start witness to mass incarceration. When I opened the door to my apartment and turned the key, for that few minutes that I was alone in my apartment for the first time was the safest I ever felt in my life. And it was the first moment of serenity I might have had in 20 years, because she was right. Having a room of my own was critical to my being able to function. And the fact that she gave me a safety net, financial safety net for 1 year allowed me the time to not worry about what to eat every day. Because prior to that, my daily decisions were, do I eat a 30-cent bagel or a $1 piece of pizza? that was taken away. And as a result, I formed Witness, not only to center the voices of formerly incarcerated women and LGBTQ people, but to build initiatives that were transformative. Two of the initiatives one is the Suitcase Project, where 6 months prior to women coming out, we correspond with them. We meet them on day one. We make sure they don't come home alone. It's based on my experience. And we try for the next 12 months, if they're interested, to be a safety net for them. We also provide them with a suitcase, a phone, with minutes for a year, computer, and $600 worth of gift certificates. Try to understand that 1 month of transportation is only 1 month of transportation, that we really need to provide. It's my strong feeling that we need a year of a safety net for each person that comes out of prison. The initiative I'm focused on now is called the MAP. Everybody perceives us as criminals for life, that we're waiting for the next crime to happen before we get rearrested. What the MAP is a first of its kind online directory of formerly incarcerated led businesses and services, because I want to celebrate and showcase the success of all the people that came out of prison with nothing but the sheer willingness and the sheer motivation to make every day of their life matter. And whether they have a laundromat in Queens or are selling pies in Brooklyn, these people's successes should be celebrated, and we should be changing the narrative to understand that we are not who law enforcement would like you to think we are. And at this point, I will stop.
Wow, subhanAllah, thank you so much, Evie, for sharing with us your story. Each time I've had the honor to work with you for the last year, but each time you share, I learn more and more. And your perspective is inspiring, particularly at your age. You're turning 70 soon, and I always just see you working 12 hours a day for this cause to help end mass incarceration in the United States. So thank you for the dedication. You truly are a warrior of God through the work that you've been doing. God bless you. And thank you for sharing. Now I'd like to turn it over to Chaplain Trisha Pethick. Chaplain, you've heard now from Sister Evie and Sister Aisha about how much faith matters to be able to survive in U.S. prisons, particularly while fasting, particularly in solitary. So I'd love to hear from you about your journey to this path of starting the Muslim Prisoner Project and what the role is for chaplains in supporting Muslim women and just women in prison in general. Thank you so much.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulullah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa salam. I'm really honored to speak alongside Evie and Aisha. They are examples of the kind of people that you can find in prisons. Some what you would expect, some what you would expect from lockup and all these TV shows, and some that are just regular people who may have some additional issues. As a chaplain for 5 years in New York State, I sort of occupied this weird space between the people who were incarcerated, the offenders, the inmates, whatever you like to call them, and the staff. Many of the little power struggles that the other ladies mentioned were things that fell to me to try to solve. You know, I didn't get my bag of suhoor on time. We were dismissed from the mess hall too early. We didn't get the full time allotted for us to have our meal together. The food service staff person took so-and-so off the list, and only the chaplain is supposed to take people off the Ramadan list. So every day, every week, it was like trying to just push back against the steady erosion of religious practice in the facility. And I will say that there are worse places in the world to be incarcerated. It is a good thing that we have chaplains in facilities to help facilitate our constitutional right to religious practice in prisons. But that being said, there's not a chaplain for every religion in every facility. And so it is often in facilities where you don't have a Muslim chaplain or even a volunteer that liberties are taken, whether intentionally or unintentionally, that can erode the practice of Ramadan or any other religious holiday in the facility. So certainly things that I've heard, for example, women and men in solitary in the middle of prayer when the meal is delivered and they don't respond. And when the officer comes around and when they don't respond, the officer keeps going so they don't get their meal. Had I been around, I would say, you have a right to cut your prayer short to get your meal in your circumstances. But many people don't know that, and so they miss their meal. And so there's all kinds of issues of communication and ignorance of the religion. And sometimes on the part of the practitioner not understanding the religion. But really, I think as a chaplain, I was in the middle of a lot of those disputes. Muslim Prisoner Project, which is the nonprofit that I'm leading right now, it was born of my experiences as a chaplain, hearing inmates say, I wrote to this mosque and I wrote to that mosque. I wrote to 6 mosques and I didn't hear from any of them. And I, on the one hand, I tried to sort of muster some kind of excuse on behalf of my faith community. And on the other hand, I really couldn't find any excuse for that, because if someone comes to you saying, help me, or what do you have for me? If you have nothing in place for them, the very least that you do is respond. Assalamu alaikum wa alaikum assalam, right? The right of a Muslim, minimally, is that we answer the salam. So if someone writes to us from a correctional facility and we're on a mosque board or we're an imam out in the community, do not be scared, do not be intimidated, do not be afraid. These are our brothers and sisters in Islam. And if you do not have someone in place in your mosque who can answer inmate mail, then reach out to an organization like Muslim Prisoner Project. Do what I did before I entered the chaplaincy program at Hartford Seminary. I got involved. I volunteered at the St. Louis County Jail because I was living in Missouri at the time. And there was a lovely organization called Let's Start. And it was housed in the Catholic Church. They met in the Catholic Church. They met on the outside and they met on the inside of the jail. And there was a woman who was a former addict, former incarcerated person who would lead the groups on the inside and on the outside. And so you as a Muslim, if there's no visitation, no regular program in your community between the mosque and the local jail or prison, you might consider reaching out to people of other faiths or even secular organizations just to get yourself inside of a facility so that you can break down those barriers of being intimidated by the idea of going inside of a jail or a correctional facility. Very quickly, Muslim Prisoner Project, we do book distributions. The state of a lot of prison libraries is terrible. There's outdated books from like 1990s, polemical material. In our prison mosque, I remember finding a pamphlet that said reasons why women should not go to the mosque, in a mosque. I got rid of that. There is a lot of either pamphlets that are too simple and volumes of hadith that are too difficult. So in between the two are sort of the kind of books you and I would like to read. And those are the type of high quality books that we send out to Muslim prisoners. And I should say that we have a lot of non-Muslim chaplains, bless their hearts, who have so much integrity in what they do that they go out of their way to Google, because often as chaplains, we don't have internet in this facility. They go home, they Google, materials for Muslims. And they contact us and they say, please send us something. We don't have anything to give to the Muslim offenders. And that's where we'll come in and say, gee, thanks, right? Because as a chaplain, we are responsible for our faith group and other faith groups that might be assigned to us. So that means the holidays, the classes, the sermons, the counseling, the death notifications, right? So in prison, life goes on. Inmates lose family, they lose friends, and it falls to the chaplain to be the person who informs you of that. And I did many of those. And people walking in my office, I've never seen them. I've met them for the first time. They're Muslim, they're not Muslim. And I have to inform them that their mother or even their small child is gone. So there's really a lot of room. There's a lot of opportunity on the part of our faith community to get involved in ministry to people incarcerated, because there are a lot of gems that are there waiting to be mined. And if we can just let them know that we know we're there, send them what we can, do what we can for them, and try to set up institutions on the outside that will meet them when they come out, that would be, inshallah, a very blessed project for all of us to work on. So with that, I will yield back to Sister Salmah and answer any questions.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much, Chaplain, for those words and for sharing with us the importance of the work that you do to support and help women. And you know, you did mention how U.S. prisons are not the worst in the world, and there are mechanisms for accountability. But, you know, U.S. prisons do have a sort of abundance in their population, which continues to fund and fuel the same system itself. Some call it the prison industrial complex. And as I'm sure you know, when we look at rates, and particularly as it comes to the call for intersectional human rights, and really having human rights institutions turn an eye, and they have been looking at U.S. prisons for a long time, but really supporting this narrative that the international community has to do something about the U.S. prison system, the racism in prison, the disparate justice that is you know, kind of tokened out towards people of color in the U.S., particularly across the globe. The 25 jurisdictions with the highest rates of incarcerating women are all American U.S. states. Then at number 26 is Thailand, and then which is the first non-U.S. government to appear on this high-end list, followed closely by number 27, which is the U.S. federal prison system. And then the next 17 jurisdictions are also American states. And these are statistics from the Prison Policy Initiative. And so, you know, while there is a lot of work being done, particularly by all the organizations here today to help us support incarcerated people, there, you know, there has to be, along this side, legal reform by judges and attorneys, likewise, just, you know, advocating for less people being thrown into prison in the first place. And I wonder what are ways in which the broader Muslim community can support Muslim women in prison throughout the United States, the Muslims who are here on this call today and non-Muslims who are joining us. What are ways that they, as you as a chaplain, can go in and you can help and you can provide direct services? What are ways in which volunteers can help as well?
Yes, that's a great question. And everything you said is absolutely true. I would start by going to your mosque, if you're affiliated with one, and saying, hey, what happens if a Muslim in prison writes to us? Is there someone who writes back? I would just start with that. And then I would say, hey, is there a group of men or even one man or one woman who goes to the local jail or prison? If so, who are they? And I think you'll find that in many masajid, there are not a lot of people tasked with either of those things. So what do you do next? Well, you kind of have to just say to yourself, I don't have to be a chaplain, a sheikh, a scholar, you know, a mufti. I don't have to be all of these things to be a companion to these people. I don't have to do that. You know, one of the things in our religion that's so important is just suhbah, is companionship, right? So the women that I was with, they didn't really, you know, they loved to learn the seerah, they loved to learn a lot of things, but we also just sat and talked about our families, and we joked and we laughed. And some of the best times that I had as a chaplain, there were moments where we almost, I don't know, I can't speak for them. We almost forgot where we were. We were just in each other's company and connecting. And so don't think that you need to come in and have all of this knowledge. In many cases, they'll be so grateful just that somebody came in and remembered them and wants to sit and pray with them. Talk about the struggle of trying to be a better Muslim, trying to be a better parent. You know, we can all talk about those struggles. One thing I would like to start is like you know, they have the Adopt a Highway program. I think we should have an Adopt a Jail program. I think every mosque should pair itself with a jail or a correctional facility and just adopt that place and send volunteers there and send donations there. Because these are satellite mosques. In every prison, there is a congregation that's meeting. It's a satellite mosque. It's hidden. You don't hear much about it. You know, the chaplain can't take a photo or a video and send it to everybody, but there's so much going on in these places. And so I hope that helps people to start thinking about how they can just, you know, call their local jail and say, hey, if you have a Muslim population there, I'd love to come in and visit or hold a basic class. How can I help out? And hopefully that's prison or jail will respond. And if they don't, then get in contact with us, because that's probably not the case.
Thank you so much. That was very helpful, and I hope I can take those steps that you've outlined just now. I hope all of us will, inshallah. Thank you so much. And thank you to the Muslim Prisoner Project for, you know, kind of really framing ways in which the community can be more helpful. We appreciate you. I'd like to also ask Evie, also when it comes to human rights in prison, particularly when it relates to women and Muslim women and some of the work that you've done, I think, you know, something that is glaring in the Reentry Project and something that you work on a lot is, and that we haven't yet discussed in this panel today, sexual trauma and violence towards women in prison. And the statistics are that incarcerated women experience sexual victimization and forms of sexual harassment, molestation during strip searches, like you discussed, coercive sexual fondling, sexual intercourses perpetrated by prisoner staff. Further, a study of prison rapes in 3 Midwestern women's prisons revealed 7% to 27% of women inmates reported being pressured or forced into sexual acts. Further, the abuse frequently involved multiple victimizations perpetrated by multiple individuals, including both correctional staff and female inmates. This is from a 2006 The Prison Journal article. And I was wondering, what are ways in which we can correct the sexual injustice that is happening towards women in prison? I know a lot of work has been done in the last 10 years to raise awareness of that. What work is still left to be done? As you always say, there's no Me Too movement behind bars. So what can we do to raise awareness of these human rights abuses that are happening?
Okay, so I'm going to answer that question, and I'm going to combine it, if you don't mind, with how Jewish women and Muslim women can be allies in reentry. I'll start by saying that one of the initiatives of Witness is eliminating sexual violence in prison. And what you have to understand is very few people really understand the trauma. I'll give you a statistic that's more current. The Trans Pride Institute received 1,567 complaints of sexual harassment, assault, or abuse in 2016. And of those 1,567 complaints, 12 were deemed substantiated, which means that they believed that the other 1% they believed and 99% they threw out. The problem is that bringing awareness is such a basic step, but it just is not enough. There are things that, so to go backwards, the Prison Rape Elimination Act of 2003 was passed by both houses of Congress, and it took them 9 years till 2012 to create standards which they could then audit and see if they're in fact prisons were able to prevent, detect, and respond to sexual violence. So once the standards were developed, it took another 2 years to train the auditors. And guess what? The auditors who are going into the prisons by law were allowed to be picked by the prisons, and by law, they had to have been working within the correctional system. So all the auditors going in to check sexual abuse or sexual violence were correctional officers. So part of the audit was to interview an incarcerated woman. And I had the privilege through my friend who created the safety net for me, Evie, during the Obama administration to speak at the White House on the criminalization of LGBTQ people. And one of the things, and during the course of the meeting, I met members of the Department of Justice, met members of the National PREA Resource Center, and I received what's called a mini grant to convene formerly incarcerated women and LGBT survivors of sexual violence in prison and to advise the DOJ what are the gaps. So I will tell you, we did that. We prepared a very damning report that essentially said that the PREA Act, in its current form, does not act as a deterrent to sexual violence. The report we gave them was never published. We also took interviews with professional filmmakers, and we provided them with 3 training films. I got to show it to the American Jail Association and another group, and the room was speechless because the tape was so damning. But what I want to tell you is nothing is going to change. It is worse 18 years later. It is worse today than it was 20 years ago, because the more you can get away with being sexually violent and never have to face any consequences. And this law has no teeth, no enforcement teeth, and no accountability teeth. So the only way to change this is I hope that Witness can work with the American Muslim Bar Association and amend the law. Short of creating changing the law, the only thing that has worked is lawsuits. So I think laws are invented so that we can have lawsuits, because lawsuits are far more effective than the laws. So in New Jersey, at the Edna Mahane Women's Correctional Facility, right now, they just won a case for $21 million, the women. This is the entire facility, and 33 officers are suspended. This is 1 month ago. So the idea that PREA acts as if they're doing something and running their ridiculous training classes and doing audits. And I just want to say that the first convening of the 10 people, we had 924 months or 77 years in prison at 63 facilities. And we reviewed the audits of all 63 facilities, and it was a joke. All of them, bar none, were compliant, and most of them were scored as exceeding compliant. And these are the very places that all these people were raped. So it's like, I used to think I would call PREA and try and work with them. I won't now. Now, you didn't publish my report. You're not honest. You're a bunch of bureaucrats. Now we're going to close you down, because and frankly, I want to blow up the 2 prisons. It's not enough for me to end mass incarceration. I physically want to put the dynamite in and watch the building go down. And I want to do the same thing to PREA.
Thank you so much, Evie, for sharing. And for the FBI that's watching, she was just joking. She really meant when the prisons are empty and we need to demolish them so we can create healing systems, you know, that then she'll be there helping us to construct these healing systems as well. But transitional transformative justice. Evie, you got to remember the Muslim population is different from the Jews. We got government always got their eyes on us.
You know what? Let them come right to me.
SubhanAllah. Yeah, well, thank you so much for sharing that, Evie. Thank you so much. And I'd like to ask Sister Aisha as well for your perspective, particularly when you were talking about, again, the lack of religious accommodations in U.S. prisons. As you know, Muslims are overrepresented in U.S. prisons, 10% in prisons, while we are 1% in the population. Yet we are routinely denied accommodations to practice our religion, bringing a disproportionate 20% of RLUIPA claims, which and RFRA claims, which are the federal laws that protect prisoners from religious accommodations. This is from a 2009 report by Marcus, and nearly 40% of these claims stem from dietary restrictions. This is from Muslim Advocates report from 2019. Despite the fact that Muslims typically believe their bodies to be a repository of divine and careful account of their diet, and it being fundamental to their spiritual, physical, and mental health, many outside observers see these accommodations as superfluous or financial inconveniences, rather than a necessary consequence of the mass incarceration in the US and a fundamental part of the freedom to religious expression for all Americans. And so given this backdrop and given, you know, like Evie said, things are only going to change once we start bringing more lawsuits. And perhaps maybe with a new administration and with new people of color in leadership, things may or may not change, but particularly, you know, litigation is something in our toolbox to help transform and attain the human rights that we hope to attain. But in the meantime, for Muslim sisters that are in prison now, given your experience, given the experiences that you dealt with religious accommodation issues, what advice do you have as a formerly incarcerated Muslim woman to give Muslim women in prison today?
I would have to say that I think it's going to vary by state, because I know here in Pennsylvania, if you ask for a Quran, they do not have it. They have ones that you can take from the library, but you have 3 days to bring it back. They used to allow volunteers to drop them off. We actually had in the facility I was in, it was a Christian chaplain. We did have 2 volunteer Muslims. There was a male and a female who came in, alhamdulillah. And they taught things as far as like talim and just going over every different aspect. The woman mainly focused on like pious Muslim etiquette and trying to convey that and teach that. But they did stop where volunteers are no longer to bring in, like you're not able to bring in books. There's no way to drop off for an organization to bring in, and like say if you wanted to bring in a bunch of Qurans, you're not able to do that anymore. So I think that's honestly going to vary by state. I know, stemming back from a question that you asked earlier, as far as something that we could do as a community on the outside, for myself personally, coming home as a new convert, on the streets at the time, and like the masjids, there's no assistance with hijabs or the proper clothing that we wear. There wasn't anything as far as that. So I think that would be somewhere to start. Maybe contacting facilities and seeing if, because I know here you have to pay to get a hijab, and not everybody has the financial stability to be able to do that. You're not able to let another, if you have more than one, let another sister borrow one, even though, astaghfirullah, it happens, but alhamdulillah, at least she's going by what she has to do to provide for herself as far as the standards of the law. So I think that a lot of it, if there could be like an organization that could break through the prison system of their rules as far as what are you capable of doing and what are you not? Because even though a prison will say they're capable and you're permitted, once it reaches there and the volunteer leaves, it never receives, like the inmates actually never receive it. Basing off of what Evie was saying, the PREA system, the guards work almost like a family, like how you have to build a family in there with the sisters or whoever it is that you find yourself with. They do the same thing. So they back themselves up, regardless of what it is, whether it be PREA, they know something happened. If it involves a guard, it's almost like their conjunction family where they'll protect one another at whatever cost it may be. So I think as far as just what can we do, as far as materials and things, because it is very limited. Like I said, if it wouldn't have been for Tayba, I wouldn't have came across the things that I did or learned the stuff that I did. So I'm very grateful for them and their organization. And I think just moving forward, maybe if we could find a way to donate things that sisters actually, like the hijabs is very important, and not everybody will adhere to that. Like if you have a search and they come in and a male will say, well, you have to take your hijab off. Well, no, I want a female guard. They don't adhere to the beliefs that we have or stand ground to that. So I think that's very important moving forward, inshallah.
Thank you so much for sharing your perspective, Sister Aisha Clarke. And yeah, subhanAllah, I hope we can build some transformation around these religious accommodation issues. I'd like to also recognize Sister Hani Hussein. Sorry if I mispronounced that. I do want to draw attention to the statistics that I stated before about the disproportional representation of Muslims in prison. That Black Muslims are disproportionately represented in those numbers for sure. And you know, racial injustice is woven into all of these statistics and all of these religious accommodation issues that we're discussing here today. I know we're scheduled for 90 minutes. I'm not sure if the IC can extend that, but I have a number of questions lined up, but I wanted to take a minute before we turn to the audience, inshallah, to, if we could please recite Surah Fatiha for all of those lives that have been lost in prison, particularly during this pandemic and before then. If we can take a minute to please have a moment of silence and read Surah Fatiha. Ameen. And I'd love to open up this to the audience. If anybody in the audience has any questions, please feel free to ask, inshallah. Okay, inshallah, if no one has any questions from the audience, feel free to jump in if you're feeling a little shy and want to ask a little later with the time that we have left. I'll just ask a couple more questions for each of the panelists here today. And I'd like to ask Chaplain Tricia, if you could talk specifically of how Islamic centers, today we're being hosted by the Islamic Center of NYU, how Islamic centers could help support the work that you're doing with the Muslim Prison Project. And this goes into a question I think that Sister Candace Hoffman had asked about how can we help the new Muslim Prison Project as well.
Yes, it's a good question, actually. The people that we serve actually qualify. What we do actually qualifies in several ways for zakat, which there are some masajid that actually have so much zakat, they don't know where to spend it, subhanAllah. And so if that's the case, I would say we are one of many good places for people to donate to, in that we serve the captive. That's a category of zakat, and a prisoner is a kind of captive. We serve the orphans, and the children of inmates are a kind of orphan because they are separated from one or both parents. We serve the needy because often these families, not all, but many are needy. And we serve the converts because many, not all, but many of the inmates are also converts to Islam. So in so many ways, the zakat that the masjids collect could go to organizations like Muslim Prisoner Project, like Tayba Foundation, because we really need to, we need funds. You know, a lot of what I do is running back and forth to the post office and just mailing stuff out to inmates, mailing stuff out to chaplains, and getting the books out there, because books in prison are like a teacher, right? The chaplain is only there so many hours. The volunteer is only there so many hours. And a book can keep you occupied. It can keep you away from the drama, away from the craziness. You can kind of escape just for momentarily and put yourself in someone else's mind and learn something new. So I think the kind of books we send to incarcerated people are important. And the books that we send, we try to really send books that convey sort of the vastness of Islam. We don't want to oftentimes some of the people we serve kind of bring a gang mentality into Islam, and you kind of have to step it back and say, well, Islam is not a gang. We actually encourage one another to do good, right? It's not cover for my brother or sister, whatever they do, including if they do wrong. So there's so much that goes into selecting the materials to send into the prisons. So, you know, but money is only one thing, right? We need people who can actually call these families of these prisoners and say, hello, so-and-so, we're calling on their behalf, and they want to send an Eid gift to their child. Would you welcome that gift, right? Because we don't know the nature of the crime and whether the family wants to have contact, or whether the crime was on the child. So we have a small fleet of volunteers who make calls to families to verify that they would receive an Eid gift. And this is modeled, by the way, on an existing program called Angel Tree. It's very popular in the prison system, and it's a Christian organization that will give Christmas gifts to the inmates, children. And they have a lot of volunteers, and we're just very much in our beginning stages. So, you know, when you think about these issues of crime, and some people struggle with it because they say, well, they must have done something to be there. Well, when it comes to children, I think we can all agree that the children are blameless and the children have been impacted. None of us can say that they are not deserving of at least a gift from their parent on our Muslim holidays, which there's only 2 of. So we, inshallah, alhamdulillah, we're blessed to be able to facilitate that and kind of try to be the middleman and try to help these people maintain ties to their children, inshallah.
Thank you so much, Chaplain. Really appreciate that. And I'd like to call on Sister Hani Hussein. You have your hand raised, sis. Please go ahead if you have a question. We'd love to hear your voice.
Hi, Assalamu alaikum. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for all of the panelists for sharing your perspectives as well as your experiences with us. I think it was incredible to hear that and powerful, although I wish that the circumstances weren't present. So I had a question about like just religiosity in the prisons, and just kind of like all of your organizations in terms of how do you balance the fine line of providing people with religious services and religious guidance, but without reinforcing this notion that prison is supposed to be some sort of religious like rehabilitation program, right? That does that, you know, because I think prisons, especially in the United States, are built out of like a very Christian lens of like you need to repent and reflection, and it's like very like of course oppressive and mandated it, like, you know. So how do you balance the delicate balance of like providing religious services but also like um not falling into that trap? And then I also just had a second follow-up question which escapes my mind right now. uh Oh, yes. In terms of the Muslim folks, in terms of like the Muslim prison project and whatnot, like how do you all, I know we mentioned really strongly about like how we can get connected to Muslim centers and like masjids and stuff like that, and like have them do some outreach programs to jails and prisons. But I think also there's a fundamental key. There's like, because I think the IT is very progressive, mashallah. Like they do incredible work and they're fantastic. And by virtue of like being in New York and just so diverse, how do we address masjids who are more conservative, who are like, oh, like, you know, who kind of would rather spend their time elsewhere, and who are like judgmental, honestly. And like I know, like religiously, it's not. I'm finding the words are hard. The words are escaping me, but you know, like I don't think all of the masjids are as progressive, and our Islamic centers are as progressive as the IC. I think there is a lot of stigma associated with helping folks who've been incarcerated. So how do we get through to that barrier? So, thank you.
There's a piece of this question I'd love to respond to. That's, but I don't have the answer to the second question. Even though religion is the only area you can make a choice, not all religions in prison have equal status. I was, for example, in solitary confinement during Ramadan when women were fasting. And I actually asked the guard, none of us knew each other, and I asked the guards, why don't you take them next month and let them observe their holiday? But what would happen is there was no attention to detail. You know, when the doors are shut and there's no visitors, the fasting was not at 7:30, it was at midnight. And when the food came, it wasn't the food they were supposed to get. So here you are fasting, it's 10 o'clock at night and you're starving and you're not even getting the food you want. So to make matters worse, in solitary, you get an hour where you get to go out. So it's only during that hour that you can talk to each other. And what they did with primarily the Muslim women was try to transfer them out from solitary to another facility halfway across the United States. And I would spend my time saying, you've gotta, there's one form of grievance that you can write. And we would spend that 1 hour with me trying to dictate a grievance that they could remember, go back to their unit and write it down to hand it in. So that happens. The other thing that happens that's bad is that in one of the federal prisons I was at, the warden brought in a very bigoted minister to speak to people on a Wednesday night. So there's 1,300 women and they allow 500 women. This is a Christian minister. And he spoke horribly about homosexuals and heathens. So all the women who were attending, who were queer women, came out a mess. But the heathens were the Jews and the Muslims. And so it was dangerous for us. I can tell you just one experience, which is you were allowed in this one federal prison to wear one piece of jewelry that was religious, so I wore a Jewish star. I had one of these women walk over to me and say, what does this represent? And I said, I'm a Jew. And she said, what's a Jew? And I thought, oh my God, I'm not in New York anymore. And I said, and she followed it up with, do you believe in Jesus? Now understand, when you're in prison, you can't be flip about how you're going to answer a question, because that answer could get you beaten up. So I thought quickly and I said, well, my religion, Jesus Christ wasn't born at the time of my religion. It's the only thing I could think of to say. And as a result, every hour of every day for close to a year, everybody walked over to me and said, do you believe in Jesus Christ? And it was worse for the Muslim women, because their hijabs were an issue every hour of the day. They were searched constantly when they didn't have to be searched. Male officers are not allowed to search women, but they did it constantly. It's against the PREA law. No cross-gendered searching. But they would make them take off their hijabs with the assumption that there was something underneath that they were hiding. So we faced horrible treatment inside. And I know that doesn't answer your whole question, but I hope it answered a little piece.
Thanks, Evie. I think, yeah, I think that's right. What I've been gathering from you all is that, like, rather than religion being, falling in the trap of being this kind of rehabilitative conversion process within the prison, it seems that Muslims and Jews are really just trying to survive and being able to practice their normal everyday kind of religious practices. And I think that also raises another point when I think I had asked Sister Aisha, what's something to tell Muslim prisoners in prison now? And as an attorney who works on civil rights cases, I think something I'd like to tell or share is that when you are in prison, to really, like the grievance you mentioned, Evie, like being able to remember details, grievances, people who treated you a certain way, the timeline of things, to really develop a case when you're out is really instructive and helpful. And one of the few tools we have to get justice post facto, to try to ensure that the laws are properly kind of vetted out in prison. I'll turn it over to Sister Aisha and Chaplain, if you all had other answers to her second questions about what to do about judgmental masjids and Islamic centers that, shun prisoners rather than welcome them, and don't understand that, the abuse or the trauma or the injustice faced by Muslim women prisoners in the States.
Record progress.
I don't know if I did anything.
Someone's not muted.
Okay, so I would say, as far as, hold on, we have was it me? Okay, so as far as like what we could do for the masjids that don't have their eyes open to the fact that everything that comes along with it. People hear incarceration and they automatically just think criminal. They don't look at the person as an individual. As working as a reentry, we give multiple different facilities that are masjids rather than just one, because I think as a whole, I honestly don't know an answer other than maybe somebody like myself that could go in and speak with somebody and explain situations. But I have noticed that people have a tendency to get set in their ways. Society has labeled people that have been incarcerated as criminals, and it's hard for certain people, regardless of the faith, to be able to get past that. So if there was just more awareness of, rather than looking at a criminal and looking at the person standing in front of you and the needs that they need met, or would be more beneficial, or having people speak on behalf of it, and maybe even having, like, I'm not sure if it would be possible, but say like at a certain masjid, have a meeting just where you're able, as an incarcerated person in the past, to be able to go in and explain this. A lot of people are very shy to be able to tell their story, why they went through, and what brought them to where they're at. But people like myself and Evie who don't have a problem with putting it out there, basically because I'm a firm believer of I went through what I went through to make me who I am. And if I wouldn't have went through some of the situations that I went through, I probably wouldn't be as strong as I am today. So alhamdulillah that I've went through what I went through. I'm not saying I'm proud of everything I went through or I enjoyed it, because it was definitely not an enjoyable ride whatsoever. But not everything turns out bad. If you can turn your situation around and make it good, it benefits a lot more. So I think it would just be a matter of having people be able to outreach and explain. And if they find that it's not working, then research and inshallah find somewhere else that's more accepting.
Yes, to Hani's question, you're not going to change everyone's mind, but we all love Malcolm X. But part of what made Malcolm X was that he went to prison and he made the most of the time that he was there. He could have sat there and said, I'm oppressed and so on and so forth, but he took that time to sort of better himself. So I'm a both and person. I don't like either or narratives. And I would say that it is possible to hold two thoughts at the same time. It is possible to both advocate for prison reform and prison transparency, and we absolutely should and we must. But it is also important to recognize that most people who are in prison, there was something that put them there. And that something is something that I, as a chaplain, was privy to. I was part of those conversations. I was part of those tears. I was part of those, that anger. And so, yes, there is a Christian background to the penitentiary, right? The place where there's penitence, the place where there's Tawbah. I don't think we can or should try to get rid of that aspect of it, particularly where I would meet people who wanted and who hadn't had an opportunity to talk about what landed them there, right? I mean, you're not going to talk always with your bunkie about what landed you there. You're not going to talk to the CO about what landed you there. The social worker has way too many cases. The prison psychologist has way too many cases. So it often would fall to, religious volunteers and teachers to kind of just explore penitence. And so we do that. And at the same time, we recognize that we're not romanticizing, prisons and saying that they're wonderful and great places. No, they need a cop on the beat, so to speak, but one that is going to actually be a cop and not, as the sister said, backing people because we're the blue, right? That is gang mentality, actually, right? That is gang mentality right there, internalized, that people who are like me can do no wrong. And if I see them doing something wrong, I'm going to cover for them. Nobody, whether they're wearing green or blue or stripes, should do that. And certainly a religious person, who we say we stand forth for justice, even if it is against your own selves, we have to operationalize that. That has to be the case. So I don't think that there's any kind of disconnect between the spiritual aspect of what it means to be incarcerated and the activism that has come about as a result of things that need to be changed in the system.
Thank you all so much for sharing. I know this panel was meant to only go to 6:30, and I'm not sure if there are any other questions from the audience. If not, I'd love for each of the panelists, if there was nothing that you were able to cover today or you wanted to share before we close, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum. Yes, I actually just wanted to mention the fact about the grievances and the process behind, like you said, like the lawsuits and things of that nature. There's actually you can get like a pushback. Like if you write a grievance on an officer, that grievance doesn't just go to the person that it goes through a chain of command up until you receive your answer back. But a lot of the time when an inmate writes a grievance, it doesn't do them the justice that they were looking for, and it actually makes it worse on them, because then not only is that guard upset, but all the other guards that it went through the hands of are upset. And you can even go as far as like reaching out to the warden and things of that nature, but majority of the time they're not resolved in a good manner. So I think it would just be important, as far as from the law aspect, if people are going to go through the grievance, that they go to their law library and make a copy of it, make a copy of what they write before, make a copy of the response they get back, because 9 out of 10 times they're just going to get the pushback of negative feelings or actions towards them from writing that grievance. So I just think that's important.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you so much. Yeah, and I think, you know, this conversation has raised a lot of ideas and some trends and patterns that we see happening in ways in which the law is flawed and failed, particularly when it comes to, say, the federal execution of laws, and how certain federal monitors are handpicked by the prison commissioners themselves or the wardens, and how the grievance process is, you know, inherently flawed and comes with this sense of retaliation, and how there has to be, you know, it just seems like there needs to be much more third-party neutral monitorship of what's happening, and that needs to be, you know, those conditions need to be written into any policies or legal kinds of reform. And from the litigation angle, for sure, it seems like it's just almost impossible. There's so many hurdles that really truly prevent civil rights justice from or human rights justice from accumulating after the fact, after someone has experienced trauma in prison at the hands of the prison system. So thank you so much for sharing that. Go ahead, Evie.
I think it's important that we decarcerate America. I don't, you know, the more that we support systems inside prison, the more that we keep it going. And I want to say what's important to understand is there's a vested interest financially and on a level of power to keep these systems in place. In New York, we just passed a bail reform law. And I was told yesterday that there are more people being arrested in New York City than ever before since the bail reform went into effect. There's just no incentive to lessen the number of people that are incarcerated. And until we get, and I want to say two other things. I was with 1,300 women in one prison and the same in another. And I read these cases. I can tell you without any doubt in my mind that close to 40% of the women were there for absolutely no reason. They were guilty of nothing but being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And a lot of young people who are 17 and running away, and there's 5 young people who run away with each other, whether it's in Texas or Arizona. If one commits a felony, the 4 others are going to get felony murder and life imprisonment because they were there at the same time. So we're way over arresting, over incarcerating, over sentencing, primarily people of color. And the answer to that is not monitoring, although it needs to be monitoring. The answer is decarcerate them. And don't let mass incarceration now become mass supervision, because profit, profit, profit. As long as we can keep people enslaved, people make money. And we have to do something about the system, not massage it. We have to break it down, and it's going to take a lot of people to break it down.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Evie. And that's also, I think you just spoke wonderfully to many who are proponents of the abolition movement, particularly in the wake of, you know, a lot of the protests from this last year, and police brutality going hand in hand with incarceration and locking people up and arresting U.S. citizens. And so I think you're right. I think the goal, as so many advocates have been saying for years, that all of this discussion about reform, and even at, you know, I'm just trying to meet the law where it's at, but then again, you know, is it really worth a lawyer's time to continue to try to work within a system? I think you're right that we have to decarcerate America, and that, you know, prisons has to be something of the past. I think our children are one day going to look at us and say, hey, is that something that really you let occur in your generation, the US prison system? And I do think, you know, many judges say they have a difficult time with this because certain, particularly in the juvenile justice system, some mothers or parents will say, well, hey, you know, my child needs to be disciplined, send them to prison. But the real answer to that, particularly for proponents of where to send people, is to create, like, you know, like you said, rehabilitative centers that other countries have launched, and other kinds of centers that are not seen as prisons, and to really kind of abolish the US prison system as it exists today, and really create a country and a nation that is all about healing. And our tradition of Islam, the highest name of God, the cumulative name of all the 99 names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is Al-Rahman, mercy. And the American Muslim Bar Association, you know, through every event we do, this is one of our four main guiding principles, mercy. And this concept of mercy is not seen in US prisons today, nor is it seen when somebody is put behind bars for decades for a small infraction or for you know, a crime. And so, and like you were saying, Chaplain Tricia, you know, many people who are in prison today may have done something, but you know, the sad reality is that many people are behind bars today who did something that is now legalized, like selling marijuana, and they're still rotting away. And this, you know, it's quite sad. And so, you know, even if somebody may have done something that was against the law, or if most people in prison have, the kind of penalties that they get are not just compensation for what they did. And I think, you know, trying to find a real sense of justice, or be part of a project that really calls for true change, because like Evie was saying, the bureaucratic processes have failed us. And so I think that is the next step, and the next kind of conversation we have to have. What is the alternative to incarceration, and how do we make that happen? How do we change the financial powers that have incentive into the system that exists today to have incentive into a different system? You know, how are we strategic about that? And inshallah, you know, I hope we can achieve these goals and keep thinking about these things, inshallah. And Chaplain, I didn't know if you had any last remarks as well.
Not really. You're right. If the question had been asked about, you know, the fairness of sentencing, then I would have certainly said what you said. I just wanted to address the sort of either or question of, well, how can we do this work and avoid the trap of saying that that prisons are places for repentance. You know, and again, I would just say it's not an either or. You know, in our faith in Islam, when Allah talks about sin, He says, you know, oppressing ourselves, right? So we have to deal with the oppressor within, and the oppressor out there. And the biggest oppressor is sometimes what's between our two sides, right? I mean, this is Islam. But that being said, we as a community, and I think the audience for this event, what is upon us is to ask, are we treating these people the way that we would any other Muslim? Because they're going to come back. Many of them are going to come back out and join our ranks and pray in our mosques, and you might not even know it. And so there's a real blessing that I think people are missing out on when they, you know, don't get involved in prison ministry. These are places where people are literally thrown, you know, they're a headline in a newspaper and then they're gone, right? For years, for decades, as you said. And oftentimes that's just where the story begins for these people. And not a lot of people see the rest of that story. So inshallah, myself and the other guests, hopefully we have kind of given people a sense that that doesn't have to be the final chapter in these people's lives, nor should it be, inshallah.
Inshallah, subhanAllah. Thank you so much, Chaplain Trisha, for sharing those words of wisdom. And you're right. I think we've been talking a lot externally in this conversation today, and you know, the prisons, what happens in prisons and the justice system. And you are right that what happens between our two sides and the kind of what we inflict upon ourselves, whether through our actions, our sins, and then our lack of forgiveness for ourselves. So that same kind of mercy that we don't see exhibited throughout the systems that we operate in, inshallah, may we at least have that kind of mercy for ourselves, and because we know that mercy is given to us by God, inshallah ta'ala. So with that said, I'd like to just close with a closing dua that I wrote, and then I'll let everybody go for the evening and break your fast, inshallah, and hopefully we'll have this recording for those who missed it. Thank you all so much for your time and for your participation and for this very robust conversation with these beautiful perspectives from these beautiful women today. Thank you all so much for your time and for joining us. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Dear Allah, God of the parallel universes, strength of women, light of women, protector of women, and supporter of women, please purify our hearts. Make us of those who are on the side of righteousness, those who support our prisoners, those who work to abolish oppression in U.S. prisons, and those who help reentry projects following prison. Let those women who have survived prison, who have survived sexual trauma and abuse, be healed by you, O Lord, particularly during these last days of Ramadan. Turn their pain into power and let them reach the highest levels of Jannah. You are the transformer of stories. You are the healer of healers. You are the highest of highs. And nothing happens except by your direction, through your shaping and your forming. So Ya Allah, help us transform the U.S. justice system. Help us transform the U.S. prison system into one of healing. Transform the hearts of those who are vetting out justice. Ameen. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Thank you all so much. Take care. Have a blessed evening. Ramadan Mubarak.
Ramadan.